I'm Rachel Kessler, 25 years old, and I woke up in a hospital bed with a dull ache in my side and voices whispering just beyond the curtain. I didn't know what had happened yet, didn't know where my brother was, but I could hear my mother's perfume before I saw her, and I could feel the way their eyes passed over me like I wasn't even there. They stood at the foot of my bed talking to the doctor, asking if they could take more from me to save my brother, and I realized then I was never meant to survive. Before I go any further, let me know where you're listening from in the comments and hit that follow button if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. I grew up in Spokane, Washington, in a house that smelled like lemon cleaner and old books. My parents, Vera and Paul, weren't the hugging type. They taught us to say thank you even when it hurt and to smile for the neighbors no matter what was going on inside the house. My younger brother, Evan, was the golden one. He had dimples, straight A's, and that easy charm people loved. And from the time we were little, I knew I wasn't meant to take up much space. Still, I tried. I helped out, I stayed quiet, I did what I could to earn their attention without asking for it. My grandmother on my mother's side was the only one who really saw me. She'd let me stay up past bedtime to braid her hair, and she gave me her silver bracelet the year I turned 13. She said it was for protection, that it would remind me to breathe when things got too loud. I wore it every day after that. The night of the crash, I was riding in the passenger seat while Evan went on about some summer internship our mom pulled strings to get him. I was half listening, fingers tracing the worn chain on my wrist, thinking about a paper I still needed to finish for my nursing class. It was raining hard, and I remember watching the red taillights blur ahead of us. Then a loud horn, Evan jerking the wheel, and the world turning inside out. When I came to, everything felt far away. The lights above me buzzed. My mouth was dry. My body ached in ways I couldn't describe, sharp and hot across my ribs and down my side. I tried to move, but nothing worked right. A nurse noticed and called for help. That's when I realized how still the room was, how alone I felt. My parents came in later. My mom's heels clicked on the tile. She didn't come to the bed. She just said, "She's awake," like it was an inconvenience. My dad stood behind her, arms crossed, not even looking at me. I heard the doctor mention something about surgery, that I'd lost a kidney. No one asked if I was scared or if I remembered anything. No one held my hand. When I looked down, the bracelet was gone. That's when my mother said it. Not loudly, not even with emotion. Just flat, like she was reading off a grocery list. She's just a burden anyway. I don't remember much else from that night. Just the beeping of the machines, the cold blanket that didn't reach past my ankles, and the hum of something quiet growing inside me. I wasn't sure what it was yet. Not then. But I knew one thing. If I survived this, I would never be their burden again. The days in the hospital passed slowly. I couldn't tell you how many, only that the light through the window changed from gray to darker gray and back again. The rain didn't let up. It tapped the glass like a clock I couldn't control. I spent most of the time staring at the ceiling tiles, counting the cracks in the flicker of the light above me. Each breath came sharp and thin. I had to remind myself to keep taking them. One in, one out. No one really came to see me. A nurse would stop in now and then to check the IV or scribble something on a chart. Sometimes I'd catch them glancing at me like I was something sad behind glass. I asked once what day it was, and the answer came quiet, like they weren't sure it mattered. At night, the halls went quiet. Machines hummed softly, and carts rolled past with a slow squeak. I kept my eyes closed most of the time, but I wasn't sleeping. Not really. It was sometime past midnight, maybe later. I heard voices just outside the room, low, cautious, like they thought I couldn't hear them. My mother's voice came first. "So you're saying if we take her other kidney?" There was a pause. Then the doctor replied, "She wouldn't survive that." Another pause. Then my father, Evan, has a future. She doesn't. And then her again, calm and sharp. She's just a burden anyway. This would be her contribution. I didn't move. I didn't blink. I couldn't. My whole body went still, like even my blood didn't want to make a sound. The tears came on their own, slow and hot. I let them soak into the pillow. I didn't want them to know I was awake. I didn't want to give them anything, not even that. Outside the door, their voices faded, replaced by the soft patter of footsteps retreating down the hallway. I lay there for hours after not sure if I was breathing. I kept hearing it over and over. Her contribution. Like I was a suitcase of spare parts. Like I wasn't even a person anymore. By morning, the rain was still coming down. The light through the window looked the same as the day before. A nurse brought in a breakfast tray and set it down without a word. I didn't touch it. A while later, the door opened again. It was my mother. She stepped in wearing a pale blouse and a pair of sunglasses pushed up into her hair. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was doing. She just pulled out her phone and checked something on the screen. That's when I saw it, the ring. Gold with a small diamond. Subtle but expensive. I remembered it from a catalog she'd shown me years ago. She'd said it was too much, that it would be irresponsible to buy something like that when Evan had college coming up. But there it was, right on her hand. I stared at it, and she noticed. Her lips tightened. For a second, I thought she might say something, but she turned back to her phone instead, said something about checking with the doctor and seeing how Evan was doing. Then she walked out, leaving the scent of her perfume lingering behind her. I turned toward the wall, pulling the thin blanket up to my chin. The words were still echoing in my mind. They'd taken the money from the accident. Whatever came from the wreck that put me here, it had already been spent. Maybe on that ring. Maybe on Evan, but not on me. They never planned to save me. That truth settled like a stone in my chest. I stopped counting the days after that. The nurses still came in and out, quiet and brief. One morning, 2 of them were standing just outside the door. Their voices were low, but I heard every word. I heard the payout came through last week. Yeah, they redirected it, said it was for family needs. She doesn't even know, does she? Guess not. Poor thing. Their words landed harder than the IV in my arm. I didn't need them to spell it out. They'd taken it, all of it. Whatever money came from my injuries, the surgery, the pain I couldn't even name, it was gone. Used for Evan. Used for themselves. Nothing was left for therapy, or rehab, or even a soft blanket. Later that afternoon, a nurse I hadn't seen before came into the room. She was older, with a kind face and a name tag that said Isolde. She checked the monitors, adjusted the IV, then sat down beside the bed without saying much. "I'm Isolde Sanders," she said after a minute. "You've been quiet." I nodded but didn't say anything. She reached over and took my hand, her touch warm and steady. "They may think you're invisible, but you're here. You're alive. Don't let them take that too." She didn't stay long, but when she left the room felt a little different. The air was still cold, the rain was still falling. But something had shifted. I lay there for a while listening to the hum of the machines, thinking about everything I had let slide over the years. All the times I stayed quiet to keep peace. All the little pieces of myself I'd given up without protest. That night I stayed awake watching the rain crawl down the window. The promise I had made to myself if I survived, I wouldn't be their burden again. It started to feel less like a whisper and more like a decision. The next morning around 6, I saw my mother's name pop up on the monitor at the nurse's station. She wasn't calling to check on me, just my vitals, my fluid intake, my oxygen levels, numbers. That's all I was to her now, just data. A few hours later, the door opened and my father came in. He didn't look at me, just walked over and dropped a folder on the tray at the end of the bed. "Doctor says you can go home tomorrow," he said. "We'll need to talk about helping Evan transition when he's discharged." Then he turned and left. I stared at the discharge papers. Going home meant going back into their house, back into the same walls where they planned what to take from me next. When the nurse came in next, a young woman with tired eyes and soft hands, I cleared my throat. "Can I talk to the hospital social worker?" I asked. My voice barely came out. I don't feel safe." She met my eyes for a long moment, then nodded. "I'll let her know," she said gently, then slipped out and closed the door behind her. I lay there waiting, listening to the monitors, counting each breath like it might be the last one I got to choose for myself. The social worker arrived just before lunch. Her name was Astria. She had dark curls pulled back in a twist and wore a slate blue cardigan that looked soft at the sleeves. She greeted me with a gentle smile, then pulled a chair beside the bed, folding her hands on a small clipboard. Her tone was calm but clear when she spoke. "The nurse said you asked to speak with me." I sat up as best I could, the movement tugging against my side. My hands were cold. I kept them on top of the blanket. "They're trying to take me home," I said. "But I don't feel safe." My voice caught, but I kept going. I overheard them. My parents. They asked the doctor if they could take my other kidney. They already took one. They used the insurance money. I don't think they see me as a person." She didn't interrupt. She didn't rush to fill the silence. When I finished, she looked me in the eye and said, "I believe you, and we'll make sure you're protected." The words didn't fix anything right away, but they landed differently, like someone had finally turned on the light in a room I'd been stuck in too long. I nodded once. She reached into her bag and handed me a packet of papers. "We're going to start the process today. You won't be going back with them." That evening, just as the sun dipped below the rooftops across the parking lot, I heard the loud click of heels outside the hallway. Then, the familiar sound of my mother's voice rising behind the glass panel in the door. "She's my daughter," she said, her tone sharper than I'd heard in weeks. "Let me in. She's lying about us." A security guard stood between her and the room. He stayed calm, told her she couldn't enter without clearance. She pointed at him, voice cutting through the corridor. "She's trying to ruin this family. We've done everything for her." Behind her, my father didn't speak. He stood still, his arms crossed, staring through the glass like he was trying to reach me without a word. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just watched. The nurses stepped forward, placing themselves quietly between me and the door. Astria appeared a moment later, speaking low to the guard. Within minutes, my mother was being walked down the hallway. Her words muffled now, hands still waving in protest. My father followed, never looking back. The room was quiet again. The machines clicked and hummed. A nurse adjusted my blanket, her hand gentle on my shoulder. I closed my eyes, and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I had to hold my breath. The next morning, the bracelet was waiting for me on the bedside table. A small zip-top bag with my name on the label. Isolde must have found it. I turned it over in my palm, tracing the smooth curve of the silver chain. It was the one thing I still had from before, the only thing I wanted to take with me. When I left the hospital, I didn't have much. A small plastic bag with my discharge papers, a pair of slip-on shoes, and a faded thrift store cardigan. The air outside felt cold but clean, like it hadn't been breathed yet. Isolde walked me to the door, gave me a short hug and said, "Don't forget who you are." I nodded and stepped through the automatic doors. They hissed shut behind me. The city felt bigger than I remembered, everything louder, faster. The bus ride across town was bumpy. The shelter where they placed me smelled faintly of bleach and boiled coffee. The room I was assigned was small, just a cot, a metal dresser, and a window that looked out over the parking lot. I placed the bracelet on the sill and sat on the edge of the bed. That first night, I didn't sleep much. I kept waking to every door that creaked open, every step in the hallway. I was still healing. My side ached every time I shifted, and I had to move slow just to stand upright. But I was alone, and I was safe. The next morning, I walked across town and found a help wanted sign in the window of a 24-hour bookstore. The manager barely looked up when I asked if they were hiring. He handed me a mop and said, "Night shift starts at 8, cash on Fridays." That was all I needed. The work was hard. I moved slow. My body ached, but I made it through the first night, and the next. I used the break room computer to sign up for online GED courses. Typed with fingers that shook from fatigue. It didn't matter. Every dollar I earned went into a jar I kept under the bed. I didn't spend anything that wasn't necessary. Weeks passed, then months. My shifts got easier. I stopped wincing when I bent to empty the trash. The scar on my side itched in the cold but didn't throb like before. I started to sleep through the night, mostly. I ignored the blocked numbers that rang my phone at odd hours. I let them go quiet. 5 months after leaving the hospital, I came home after a shift to find my closet rod had collapsed. As I picked up the few hangers I owned, I noticed a thin envelope had fallen behind the dresser. My name was written on the front in familiar handwriting, Astria's. Inside was a small folded note and a USB drive labeled Tacoma General Audio. The next day, I went to the library and found a quiet corner. I borrowed one of the public laptops and plugged in the drive. My fingers trembled on the keys. I clicked play. The voices came in clear. "So you're saying if we take her other kidney, she wouldn't survive that. Evan has a future. She doesn't. She's just a burden anyway." I sat still, listening to every word. The file ended and I closed the screen. My reflection stared back at me in the dark monitor. My eyes were red, but I was steady. I unfolded Astria's note. It said, "When you're ready to protect yourself, this is yours to use." I put the drive back in my pocket, walked outside into the early evening air. The streets were wet, the clouds were low. The street lights glowed yellow and soft. I held the drive in my hand and stood for a moment beneath a tree near the bus stop. The wind pulled at my sleeves. I didn't know what I would do yet, but I knew this: I was done being quiet. I didn't go home right away after leaving the library. Instead, I walked. The sidewalks were still damp from the rain earlier, and the clouds overhead looked heavy again. I tucked the USB into my coat pocket and kept my hands there, feeling the shape of it, as I passed familiar storefronts, some open, some dark. A man with a pushcart shuffled past me, the wheels clicking unevenly on the pavement. Somewhere nearby, a train horn called out in the distance. I took the long way back to the shelter, passing under streetlights that hummed quietly. It was nearly midnight by the time I reached my room. I locked the door, turned off the overhead light, and sat on the edge of the bed. My knees ached. My side pulled when I bent forward to untie my shoes. But I didn't feel tired the way I used to. I pulled out the USB again and set it on the dresser. Just looking at it was enough for now. The next morning, I woke early before the sun. The sky was just beginning to lighten behind the buildings when I left for work. I stopped by the corner bakery for a black coffee, holding it close to warm my hands as I waited for the bus. Across the street, a woman in a blue coat was walking a small dog. She waved at the driver of a red pickup pulling out of the lot. The world was moving on. My shift at the bookstore passed the way they usually did, slow and steady. I mopped the front entrance, restocked some of the end caps, and sorted through a box of returned items. I was careful not to twist too fast or lift too much. The healing scar across my left side reminded me when I reached too far. During my break, I used the computer in the back to check the GED site. I finished a quiz and reviewed a lesson on reading comprehension. My fingers moved more confidently now. Fewer typos, less backspacing. The work felt like something solid, something I could stack up one brick at a time. That night I stopped by the corner store and picked up a pad of paper and a pen. I wanted to write something down, not a letter exactly, more like a list. Things I'd survived, things I needed. But when I sat on the bed to begin, I ended up drawing a single line across the page over and over until it became too thick to see through. The next day was quieter. I spent the morning cleaning the shelves near the back of the store where the floor was uneven and the light bulb flickered. During lunch, I walked to the library again and used the same computer to check a few job boards. Nothing new. Still, I bookmarked a couple of listings and wrote down the contact numbers. At home that evening, I boiled water for tea in the shared kitchen and sat by the window with my cup in hand. The bracelet was on my wrist again. I'd started wearing it during my shifts, keeping the chain tucked under the sleeve of my uniform. It didn't get in the way. It was just there, quiet and steady. I'd been at the shelter almost 6 months when one of the staff handed me a form about low-income housing. They said I'd been approved for a studio across town. It wasn't much, just one room with a kitchenette, a tiny bathroom, and a view of a brick wall, but it was mine. I moved in the following week with a small duffel bag, my work shoes, the bracelet, and the USB drive. I kept working the night shift, and during the day I chipped away at the GED lessons. I passed the reading exam first, then the writing. Math took longer, but I eventually earned my certificate. I picked it up in a plain envelope from the testing center and held it in my hands like it might vanish if I blinked. At the end of that year, I applied to a vocational training program focused on healthcare admin. I didn't tell anyone, just filled out the application on a public computer and waited. A month later, I received a letter with my name on it and the word accepted in the second paragraph. I didn't celebrate. I just got up the next morning and showed up for orientation. The program was fast-paced. I stayed quiet in class, sat near the window, and kept my head down. But I completed the work, submitted my papers on time, and passed the licensing exam on the first try. Within 6 months, I was offered a job with a small healthcare startup that focused on patient advocacy. At first, I handled the phones and filing, answered emails, ordered supplies, but I paid attention. I learned how the software worked, how to organize a database, how to ask questions that got answers. My supervisor noticed. She moved me to intake coordination, then training, then management. By the time I turned 26, I was the company's operations lead. We had a team of 15 and a growing list of clients. I used my legal name, Rachel Kessler, for everything until the day I sat in front of a county clerk and asked to file paperwork to change it. I signed the forms carefully. My new name was Claire Olin. It wasn't meant to erase anything. It was just time. I kept a photo of my grandmother in the top drawer of my desk, tucked beside the USB. I didn't open that file again. Not yet. But I knew it was there. One morning while I was reviewing HR files, a new candidate came across my desk. The application had been flagged for fast-track approval. His name was listed in bold at the top of the resume, Evan Kessler. I didn't feel anything at first. Just looked at the screen and let the moment settle. Then I clicked the intercom. "Schedule him for 8 a.m. tomorrow," I said. "I'll handle this one personally." I stayed late that night after everyone had gone. The office lights had dimmed to their automatic night settings, soft and low across the carpet. I cleared my desk, locked up the documents I didn't want seen, and stood by the window looking out at the street below. The rain had picked up again. It hit the glass in thin streaks, each drop tracing a path before sliding away. Tacoma looked different from this height. From here, the storefronts were just squares of light. The sidewalks looked clean and even. You couldn't see the cracks or the corners where water pooled or trash gathered against the curbs. I stayed there a while, not thinking about much. Just watching. Just letting the quiet stretch out before morning came. I arrived early the next day before the first elevator dinged in the hallway. I brought 2 cups of coffee, one for me, one for the interview table, and set them down in the glass conference room. The USB drive was already there next to my notebook. I didn't open it, just placed it where it needed to be. The clock read 7:57 when the door opened. He looked almost the same, a little heavier, shoulders broader, hair shorter than I remembered. He wore a dark blue suit and brown shoes that looked like they'd been polished in a rush. His eyes moved quickly around the room, taking in the table, the chairs, the view. Then he saw me. He stopped walking. "You're alive," he said, his voice cracking halfway through. I nodded once. He stepped inside, slowly lowering himself into the chair across from me without taking off his coat. His hands hovered over the table, not sure where to land. I picked up the USB and slid it across to him. "Yes," I said, "I'm alive, and I remember everything you let them do." He didn't touch the drive. He looked down, then back up, then let his hands fall to his lap. "I didn't know they'd saved it," he said. "The recording. I didn't think it was still around." "I don't need excuses," I said, my voice steady. He nodded, lips pressed tight. Then he looked toward the door, not like he was trying to leave, just like he needed to know where it was. He paused, cleared his throat. "I need a job, okay? Things haven't been easy." I leaned forward, resting my arms on the table. This company was built for people who were discarded, people who weren't believed, people who survived. And we fight for them so no one else can do what was done to us. People like you, Evan. You're exactly what we protect people from. He opened his mouth to say something, but no sound came. His shoulders slumped. The fabric of his jacket creased across his back as he leaned forward slightly, hands still resting in his lap. I picked up the USB and slipped it into my coat pocket. "You won't work here," I said, "and you won't work anywhere I can reach, and I can reach far." He stood more slowly. His hand moved toward the back of the chair, like he wasn't sure what to do with it. His eyes looked older now, not tired but worn down, like something had finally settled in. As he reached the door, he paused, hand on the glass handle. He turned back to face me. "Claire, I didn't know." I met his gaze. "But you do now." He didn't say anything else, just pulled the door open and stepped into the hallway. The glass clicked shut behind him. The morning sun had crept higher now, spilling through the windows, warming the edge of the table. I walked back to my desk, sat down, opened my inbox, responded to 3 vendor emails before finishing the rest of the coffee. By noon, the building felt normal again. The usual shuffle of meetings, conversations in the hallway, the sound of the copier down the corridor. Nothing had changed in their world. But something had shifted in mine. I didn't feel relief. Not yet. But I didn't feel small either. That night, I took the long way home, walked past the bookstore where I used to clean floors. The same night clerk was still behind the register, scrolling through his phone, tapping his foot to music I couldn't hear. I didn't go in, just kept walking. At the corner of the block, I paused at a mailbox. I reached into my bag and pulled out a sealed envelope. No return address, just a short note inside. I dropped it into the slot, listened to the metal hinge close, and stepped back. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, made coffee, took my time getting dressed. The bay outside my apartment glinted in the sunlight, soft waves shifting along the dock. There was still more to do, but the hardest part, stepping back into the same room as him, was done. I didn't hear from Evan again after the interview. No calls, no emails, nothing forwarded through HR. He disappeared from the system as quickly as he had entered it. I went back to my routines: early mornings at the waterfront, long days at the office, quiet evenings in my apartment, with the windows cracked just enough to let the breeze roll in off the bay. 2 weeks later, I stopped by the lobby mailbox on my way up the stairs. Most of the envelopes were the usual billing notices, flyers, a catalog for winter coats, but one was plain, no return address with handwriting I recognized immediately. The slant of the R, the loop of the L. My mother. I stood in the stairwell for a moment before opening it. Inside the note was written in uneven lines across the page. "We are losing the house. Evan can't find work. We need your help. You're still our daughter." I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and carried it upstairs. I set it on the counter and filled a glass of water from the tap. The cold was sharp and grounding. The apartment was quiet, except for the distant hum of traffic below. I turned the envelope over once, then again, then set it aside. Later that evening, I sat down at the small kitchen table and took out a sheet of paper. I wrote slowly. One line. "I was your daughter when I was unconscious in a hospital bed. You chose your son. Now live with that choice." I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. I sealed it in an envelope and dropped it in the corner mailbox the next morning before work. At the office, the building was already humming with activity, key cards tapping against the scanner printers, running the faint sound of someone laughing near the coffee station. I nodded to a few team members as I passed, then stepped into my office and closed the door. That afternoon, I received a department-wide email from Tacoma General. They were launching a new ethics protocol, an initiative to protect minors and vulnerable patients from pressure during organ donation cases. The message detailed policy revisions, patient rights training, and legal protections. It was part of a new campaign. At the bottom of the email, just above the signature line, was a single line of text, the CLA Protection Protocol, named in honor of Claire Olin. I leaned back in my chair, letting the words settle. My name, my chosen name, was now tied to something that would protect people. Not just in one hospital, but in policy, in practice, in future decisions where someone like me might have been alone. That evening, I didn't stay late. I walked home just as the sun dipped below the edge of the bay. I left the windows open and made a simple dinner: rice and roasted vegetables, the kind that didn't take much time, but made the apartment smell like home. The next morning, I walked down to the docks before sunrise. The sky was streaked with pale gold, and the water lapped gently against the posts. I sat at the end of the pier, my legs hanging over the edge. The bracelet on my wrist caught the first light warm against my skin. I said the words out loud, though no one was around to hear them. I kept living even when they tried to end me. There would still be nights when the memories returned. Hospital lights, distant voices, the soft click of my mother's heels against linoleum. But that morning, the sound of the water and the wind in the trees reminded me of something else, that I was still here, and that I had made something of that fact. A few days passed after the announcement about the CLA protocol. The office had returned to its usual rhythm: morning check-ins, vendor calls, onboarding prep. The coffee machine in the break room kept humming. People came and went without knowing what had changed behind the scenes. I sat at my desk one evening going through contract renewals when I heard the building intercom buzz from the security desk downstairs. It wasn't unusual, especially during late meetings or vendor deliveries. But this time, the front desk called through to me directly. "There's someone here asking for you. Said it's personal." I paused. Name. She didn't give one. I told them to hold her there and stood up slowly, reaching for my blazer on the back of my chair. The sun was almost down. The edges of the windows glowed orange, casting long shadows across the conference table. I walked to the elevator and rode down without speaking, feeling the quiet stretch between the floors. The lobby was mostly empty, just a few staff lingering near the doors. My mother stood near the reception desk, her purse clutched tightly in both hands. She wore a wool coat I hadn't seen before, and low heels that clicked softly on the tile when she turned at the sound of the elevator. Her face was pale eyes rimmed with dark circles. She didn't look surprised to see me, just tired. We stood in silence for a moment before she spoke. "I just need a few minutes." I nodded once and led her to the small glass conference room near the front. She walked in ahead of me, shoulders slightly hunched, and sat down at the far end of the table. I remained standing. "I got your letter," she said quietly. "I didn't expect—" She stopped herself, folding her hands in her lap. Her voice was thinner than I remembered, less sure. "We lost the house last week," she continued. "Evan's been out of work for months. He doesn't talk to us. I didn't know where else to go." I waited. She looked up at me, her eyes searching. "I know what we did. I know it was wrong. But we didn't know how to fix it." I reached into my bag and placed the USB drive on the table between us. She didn't touch it, just looked at it, then looked away. "You were our daughter," she said softly. "We didn't protect you the way we should have. I see that now." I didn't speak. I thought maybe she added, just maybe there was something left. I pulled out a document from my folder, a copy of the hospital's legal records, the ethics review, and the payout transfer logs. I slid it across to her without explanation. She picked it up with shaking hands and scanned the page. Her lips moved slightly as she read. After a minute, she set it down and rested her hands on the edge of the table. "I didn't know you'd saved all this," she whispered. I nodded. "I saved everything." She looked around the room, eyes landing briefly on the framed photo near the window, the one of our leadership team from last year's conference. I watched her face as she studied it. "You built something," she said, "all on your own." I didn't respond. She stood slowly, placing one hand on the back of the chair to steady herself. "I should go." I opened the door for her. She walked past me, then paused in the doorway. "I hope someday you find peace with all of this." I met her eyes one last time. "I already have." She left without another word. I returned to my office and sat at the desk, the USB still in my hand. I placed it back in the drawer beside the photo of my grandmother. Outside, the lights along the bay had started to flicker on, casting soft reflections on the water. That night, I didn't work late. I walked home, stopping by the same corner store I used to visit after my shifts at the bookstore. The clerk didn't recognize me. I picked up a box of tea and a small loaf of bread paid in cash and continued home. The apartment was quiet when I opened the door. I slipped off my shoes, poured a glass of water, and stepped out onto the balcony. The sky was clear, the stars barely visible above the streetlights. I stood there for a while, the railing cool beneath my palms. No one was coming to save me anymore. The following morning, I opened the window before sunrise. The air carried that familiar scent of salt and fir trees. I stood there for a while, holding my mug close, watching the light slowly move across the sky. Something about it felt final, but not in a sorrowful way, more like the quiet breath after a long exhale. I went to work early. The office was still dim, the floor quiet except for the cleaning crew finishing up. I turned on the desk lamp, logged in, and sent one final email to legal. It confirmed the last transfer, the foundation I had quietly built over the past year, in my grandmother's name, an education grant for girls in foster care who aged out of the system but still wanted to try. There would be no plaque, no press release, but the first applications had already started coming in. Later that day, I boxed up the last of my things. I wasn't leaving in anger, just ready. I'd spent enough years proving my worth in rooms that never saw me clearly. Now I was stepping into something different, something that didn't ask me to beg for space. On my way out, the receptionist handed me an envelope. She said it had been dropped off that morning, no return address. I recognized the handwriting. I waited until I got home to open it. It was a single sheet of paper. "We've moved. Evan's gone. I don't know where. I'm sorry for everything. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I kept the bracelet. I set the letter down beside my keys and turned on the kettle. I didn't cry. I didn't feel anger, just a kind of stillness, like a door had closed with a soft click, and I didn't need to check if it had locked behind me. In the months that followed, I traveled for the first time in years. Small places, quiet places. I met people who didn't know my past. I cooked in rental kitchens, walked new trails, mailed postcards to no one. I gave myself permission to be a whole person again, not a file in a hospital drawer, not a liability on someone else's insurance form. Sometimes on the colder mornings, I still trace the outline of the scar near my ribs. It healed unevenly like it had something to say. But I never covered it up. I let it breathe in the mirror. A mark left by the moment they gave up on me, and the moment I didn't. I didn't get justice in a courtroom. I didn't confront anyone with cameras rolling. But I lived. I chose a life that was mine, not one they picked for me. And every quiet, ordinary day I get to live, it is more powerful than any apology they never gave. If you've ever had to rebuild your life from someone else's decision, if you've ever had to carry the weight of being discarded, just know you're not alone. You get to decide who you become, and it's never too late to start. Thank you for spending this time with me. If this story found you at the right moment, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if you know someone who needs to hear it, feel free to share. Take care of yourself. You matter more than they ever told you.